Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Doctor's Lounge with myself, Dr. Imad Alauddin, Dr. Sajjad Ahmed, and today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Alexis Manning.
Oh, Locum Lounge.
Yes.
Yes. All locums. There should be Locum Lounge, not Doctor's.
Yeah, we are all locums, and that is the topic of our discussion today. We're talking about locum and locum life, and yeah, just a disclaimer before we start: we are all locums, so read into that what you will.
Mm-hmm.
But we hopefully will go through a little bit about what it means to be a locum. If you're a GP registrar, a bit more information of how to do locuming and locum work, the positives and the pitfalls, and then have a little chat about our own experiences. So Alexis, for those of you who don't know, has been a locum for some time. He's been representing locums for the LMC, if I remember correctly. Or used to?
I stepped down from that. That's quite correct, yeah.
And he's also been involved in helping locums find work through his, initially it was a Facebook group called Welsh Locums, and which is now grown into a website where locums can find work. And we'll go into that a bit more later on as well. So first of all, how are you all?
Sorry, it's very of me. It's like calling it Welsh Locums because it's for locums in Wales, so it seemed to make sense. And as you say, it was initially just a group for colleagues and friends for work that I was offered that I couldn't do. So I passed on to other people in the Facebook group, and it became more and more popular. And now there's about 500 people on it.
Yeah. That sort of gives me hope for this podcast. One day it'll really spread and we'll have a Facebook group on the podcast.
Maybe so. You never know.
You never know. Yeah. Absolutely. So anyway, how are you guys doing these days? I mean, how is work?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I was quite lucky with COVID because I had a couple of long-term locums on the go. So I've carried on with those. My sessions have dropped down a little bit, but generally doing all right. I've had colleagues in really quite bad situations as a result of COVID. Some people even having to go on to benefits because they can't find any work. Because a lot of people do rely on ad hoc work rather than long-term work.
Yes.
And obviously a lot of that has just dropped down sharply, which is odd, even as demand is increasing.
It has. I mean, even like I've noticed that because I tend to do a lot of different stuff. So I used to do medical education quite a lot. So I used to teach in Cardiff University at the undergrad. I'm also an examiner for PLAB, GMC. But when COVID hit, there was no social distancing in those things. And also GMC stopped doing the exams. So I stopped those, even though they've restarted again. But I'm so apprehensive of actually going on a train to Manchester, staying in a hotel, and then going for the exam sessions that I'm thinking, I'm not even picking up any dates yet. So to be honest, and I've also been doing out of hours for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been probably relying more on out of hours, and then my long-term locums have been going on for 8-9 months now, which is the only practices I'm working in. Is only the long-term sessions commitments that I've had for such a long time. I'm just continuing that. I think, Imad, you're doing the same sort of situation?
Yeah. So my situation was, during this period, I've got some regular locums, which I've been continuing on with during the COVID period. I did have one day of ad hoc, but that sort of disappeared completely during the lockdown. But luckily, I had enough work to get me by. But yeah, I've had a lot of colleagues as well who've had, they've had long-term locums being cancelled by practices.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, they've been sort of sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. And the worst case scenarios, as Alexis was saying, some of them going into benefits. And a lot of people who are not doctors are so confused by that. It's like, this is you guys, we need doctors so much. How are you doctors not finding work at this time? And I don't really have an answer to them. I suppose the workload.
I think we did. There was a couple of articles on Pulse and GP News about how locum was sidelined during COVID. When the Prime Minister comes in on a screen and say, well, we're going to hire X amount of doctors to come back from retirement. Well, nobody was saying, well, you've got this huge amount of pool of doctors. Use them. Use the locums. I mean, that just didn't make sense to me.
Well, I think they did use the locums partly for like the Nightingale hospitals and so forth, but when they spun down, the work went, and I think there's quite a lot of GP hub work as well. But again, the demand is still such that people aren't taking holidays, and so I think locums are still less required at the moment. I also asked in my group about, well, what people are doing now, what's happened, and a lot of people have actually shifted out of locum work to do other things. It's motivated people to take their pension and to leave medicine entirely, rather than carry on working in a risky environment. So you've got some people move to salaried, some people move to partner, but a lot of people have found other things for their other ways to earn money instead.
What is the sort of percentage? I mean, I know on the Welsh Locums group, we were about 250, 300 people.
Yeah, there's about 500 doctors 500. On the but most of them are quite quiet.
Quiet, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, obviously locums are in a variety of age groups. I'm not going to mention my name, but I've been a locum for 10 years. And I was a surgical trainee before that, so you can do the math. So, I mean, there's quite a lot, and you know, there's a lot of them are friends or colleagues we've come across quite a few times, but there are many I don't know. So there must be new coming in as well, and then there are the ones who are the seasoned, much more seasoned locums. I've seen quite a new faces in out of hours, and because we used to be sort of the old, same old, working for years and years, and now suddenly with COVID, there's quite a new recruitment that's happened. So what sort of percentage would you say in your group have actually decided that they're not going to work at all and just going to take retirement? Or
when I asked people, I had 36% said they've reduced their locum work or they've shifted to other commitments. So they're trying to diversify a bit to ensure they've got a good income coming in. Yeah. And otherwise, it looks like in terms of pensioning, it doesn't look like too many. It looks like probably about 10%.
Right.
Said they've reconsidered work-life priorities.
Right.
Which I interpret to mean there are more important things than work and earning money.
Yeah.
So they're shifting out of there entirely. A lot of locums are on the more senior side of things as well. And I think there's two different big classes of locums. You get the short-termers, people who have just finished qualifying, and they see it as a quick way of earning some money. And these are people who tend to really ask for higher fees than the career locums who try and get more regular work. And so will set more regular, not more regular, but who will set more reasonable fees to try and get more repeat business. So the people who are coming in and have a more short-termist attitude towards it, I think a lot of them have been quite burnt by COVID because there simply isn't the work there at the moment. So they're shifting off to other things. Pardon me. So they're shifting off to other things like out of hours or like GP hub work.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a dichotomy, isn't there, of people who are being locums. Either you've got the other group I found are a lot of partners who either for one reason or other have decided to come out of partnership and take up locuming, either because the practice has folded, because the partners have retired and they've not been able to replace them, or the rigours of being a partner has become too much at this stage with the government and pressures from local health boards. So you're right, you do have that some older, more seasoned GPs taking up locum work, and you've got the new not out of college because they're registrars, but the newly qualified GPs who will start off in that way and find their feet with that method before maybe settling down or carrying on sort of full time.
Sure, I do think you've got to be careful with that though, because if you are setting yourself up as a locum, you're essentially saying that you're a safe pair of hands, that you can do things without too much supervision. And so doing it straight from BTS can be a bit risky. It's a bit like passing your driving test and going, right, I'm going to go and become a taxi driver, where you haven't got anyone else to support you. And practices will vary very much in what kind of support they give their locums. They will normally expect you to be pretty self-sufficient. So I'm not sure I'd advise them to go straight into locum from BTS without having a base somewhere else. So one good method might be to take on a salaried job or a regular position in your training practice while you're branching out elsewhere to find your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do just throw themselves into it without.
I think also what I've noticed is for a time there was quite a lot of interest in these new apps, the Push Doctor, and which we don't want to name. So a lot of them were sort of relying more, mostly on that rather than even working for the NHS from the beginning. And there was this big, huge demand for that. I mean, it almost sounds like you sort of lose the soul of general practice.
Yes.
The family doctor.
Yes.
One with the elbow patches and wearing wellies going into the, we don't have that anymore. And I, even as a locum, I feel that, although I call myself a locum, but I've been in the same practice for 8-9 months. Me as a locum, but I do everything that would be asked of me, really, even if it's blood results or if it's letters or if it's anything else. I don't mind that.
And that's exactly it. That's what a long-term locum does. You're not going to sit around your bum if there's 18 patients booked to see you, but only 8 turn up. You'll go, right, where's some scripts to sign? Where's some bloods? Where's some document? You make yourself useful. If you have got a short-term attitude and you come in saying, right, I'm going to see the number of patients I've got to see, they're not turned up, or they've only booked me 8 patients. Oh, well. And that's the wrong attitude. You've got to make yourself useful to the practice for them to want you back. With regards to places like Push Doctor and so forth, I think that's quite interesting because, say, 6 months ago, we said that's awful medicine. These people are basically getting antibiotics over the phone for a sore throat without being seen, without being examined. And that's exactly what we're doing now. And that's become the new normal, as people say, with COVID. A lot of people, you certainly don't want to look in their throat. And you go, right, well, little Johnny's had a bad throat for a week and he's got white spots on his tonsils, he's got a temperature. We'll give him some antibiotics to be safe. And we all know that chances are this is going to be a viral thing, but we have all shifted to this kind of medicine anyway. So a lot of the complaints about it aren't really valid anymore, I think.
Good point.
Yeah, I think antimicrobial stewardship has gone out the window a little bit with the way we're working at the moment, because you're trying to minimize spread, but the cost is that you're doing things. Not the easy option, but the easier option is to treat them with antibiotics rather than bring them in and expose yourself, other patients, and other staff members to potentially someone who may be carrying COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah. What on the topic of sort of new registrars coming into full-time work, obviously from my point of view, I started off being a locum to have a look and see what other practices are out there, see how different people work, to give myself a bit more exposure, to see what is a good place for me to settle down into, rather than, because obviously with your training practice, you've got 1 and 2 training practices. You don't know if they're the best ones out there, or you think actually, they're the worst ones out there, or actually you go and work in other places, you actually find, no, actually the one I thought was good is not so good, or the one I think was bad is actually quite good. So in your guys' opinion, and maybe from your own personal experiences, what drove you to get into locum work, and what's the positives and the drawbacks of being a locum or a sessional GP, as we're officially titled?
I mean, I'll probably give you a little bit of my reasons, because I've been locuming for 10 years now, and I also tried to settle down once or twice. Didn't work out. So my issue is complex in the sense of family issues. I'm the sole breadwinner for my mum, who is currently in Pakistan, and she doesn't get a visa. She's got visa refused. So with that, technically means I have to fly 2 or 3 times a year to spend 3 or 4 weeks with her. And at the same time, sometimes I need to go with the drop of a hat. If she's suddenly unwell, I need to get a ticket, get on a plane, and get down there. So I would find it very challenging which practice would actually be accommodating to that. I mean, they say, oh, we'll be accommodating and you can get unpaid leave, but that's not really the answer, because what happens is what I've found is if you join a practice, you can't really do that to your colleagues in the same practice, where you would be down for your on calls and they're on their leave or something like that, and suddenly something comes up and you just got to pack up and leave. And then that affects your salary as well. That affects your business income and all those sort of things. So as a locum, I had this option of I have no stress, where if suddenly something were to happen, God forbid, to my mum, I need to get on the plane and be able to get out there. I just need to ring the practice manager and say, look, I can't do it. I'm sorry. I'll ask my colleagues around. I'll ask Alexis to find you a locum. And I need to go. So that was one reason. And then on top of that, you also want your flexibility in terms of your work. You're stressful. You need some time off. You need some downtime for yourself. I want to sometimes choose. I only want to work a morning, maybe an afternoon. So I have that flexibility, and I think that's the biggest for me. But the downside is, of course, COVID brought that out. If you don't have work, you don't get paid. You can't travel. You can't take really time off. You can't afford to have time off because you're not getting paid for your annual leave or your sick leave. Cardiff out of hours introduced a salary type of a position during the COVID times to have a regularity of work, and if you were to fall ill, you would be entitled to sick pay. I took them on that, but that's ended. They're not offering that anymore. So yeah.
I think the flexibility has certainly got the biggest part to it. I have got young children to worry about, so trying to juggle pick up and drop off is always a bit difficult. And the wife's a surgical reg, so we're constantly juggling. And I also think there's a degree of independence as well. I don't think it's much of a surprise that I've ended up in general practice, which is probably the last area of medicine where you've got any kind of autonomy. They don't work directly for the NHS. They work as independent contractors for the NHS. And I work as independent contractors to independent contractors. So you can't really get much more independent than that. And when I've looked into other things like salary positions or partnership, the best description I've heard of partnership is like a marriage with 6 people. I mean, anyone who's been married knows how hard it is to get a marriage with one person working. A marriage with 6 people just fills me with trepidation and dread. It may be suitable for me later in my life, but currently this flexibility for the family commitments works very well. And there certainly are downsides, as you say. If you're self-employed, no worky, no payee, and if you get hit by a car or something, it's tough. It's up to you to make allowances for it.
Yeah.
So I certainly, it's not always greener. I've had colleagues tell me who are thinking of going into locum work, they couldn't bear the idea of going to a different practice every day and getting set up and learning the way that different practices do different things and dealing with patients you don't know well. But it comes down to preparation. So for my practice, I always turn up early because I want to review the patient notes and have an idea of who are the more complicated people and get a rough idea of their background, rather than just phoning my next patient to go, right, Mrs. Bloggs, so it's about your leg. You want to know a bit more than that. And that's, again, what a good locum does. It's a general practice is a job that's easy to do badly. And I would say that locuming in general practice is also a job that's very easy to do in a very shoddy way. You can turn up and deal with the immediate problem and nothing else. It can be very rewarding. You do tend to go back to the same kind of practices again and again. And if you're looking at patients with a fresh pair of eyes, you often see things, not often, but you sometimes see things which have been missed or overlooked by other people. So there's a lot of positives to going to locum, as well as the negatives.
Yeah. And as we're all locums here, I'm going to play devil's advocate and take on the role of a partner. I think you've touched on this already. There's a lot of partners who view locums very negatively. They say, they charge a lot of money, they just do what they're contracted to do and won't go the extra mile for the practice. And also, if all these locums took up partners or salaried roles, then the NHS would be in a better situation because you're not paying money for locum fees. How do you respond to those comments or that mindset that some of our colleagues in the general practice hold?
I think some of my locum colleagues are very mercenary at charging too high fees, and the answer is you don't use them. If you keep hiring people in those kind of terms and conditions, they're going to keep coming back.
Yeah.
I think that some of the managed practices are the worst in that regard because it's not their money and they don't really care. And so they do pay swinging fees for substandard service. And I think it's quite easy as a locum to get a name for yourself, a negative name. And when people ask me, when I want to get started in locuming, what do I do? You should remember that you are your brand in a way.
Yeah.
If you get a reputation of being unreliable or for generating justifiable complaints, then you're not going to get work again. Your name will get
Exactly. I mean, I was given an example by one of the partners who told me that apparently there was a locum in a neighboring practice who didn't know at the time that they were probably going to be single-handed on the evening. But anyway, they took on the locum and they were doing the work, and a house call came in and they refused to do it. And this is a single locum GP in a practice with an emergency house call coming and then refusing to doing it because you didn't agree. So they'd rung in and said, could you actually help us from the cluster group? And then they were told that, they should be reminded the GMC's duties of a doctor.
Absolutely. I think medically legally you put yourself in a very bad position there.
This is, and I was thinking, like, if this was me, would that practice call me back? If I were to say, no, I'm not going to do I'm not going to do the house call, I'm not going to do this, why would they call me back? It wouldn't be a really good experience for the same practice, would it? I mean, they would remember that, I was the one who didn't do the house call.
I think it's more than that. It's not just they wouldn't call you back. They would talk to their practice manager colleagues and say, this is someone you shouldn't consider.
Yeah.
They left us an alert because of this situation.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way I was. Now I'm doing more regular locums, but when I was doing ad hoc locums, I always saw it as this practice is in need of a doctor. They're not willingly having a locum. They need some cover and would need some support. So I'm there helping the practice as much as I can and doing as much as the work as I can. If I don't do it, it'll fall on the other doctors who are already there, the partner or the salaried, or in which case, if it's you're there by yourself, the person the next day to take on. And I don't think that's a fair way of doing work to essentially your colleagues. Even though I'm not a permanent member of the practice there, I'm there as their colleague and on an equal footing to them. And I don't think that's the right way to go about anything in life, putting work on other people.
Absolutely.
That you can possibly do yourself. Yeah,
same thing. I mean, I don't want to toot my horn, but a little bit is okay. I've been in a practice where it was meant to be me and one of the other partners, and suddenly they've called in sick, and so you're the only one for the entire day, and you were not originally booked from to do an on-call or to stay until 6:30, but I did. I didn't moan about it. And actually, I was, very, very much appreciated for that later on.
There is a difference there, isn't there, between doing the extra and being taken advantage of. I mean, in that kind of situation, if you found yourself being on call unexpectedly, then as long as family commitments allow it, then of course you do it, but you'd also charge for it as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think you'll find that if you're willing to do it, the practice understand that there may be an additional charge for it. So they don't actually fight you on that too much.
No.
That you'll have more problems if you actually refuse to do something.
Yeah.
Even if you said up front, there's a charge for it, I'll do it. That's going to hold you in better stead, if that makes sense, rather than saying, "Oh, I don't do house calls. That's it. That's my flat policy. I'm not doing it."
But again, it's all about the flexibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is what I'm saying. If you are booked, can we get you to see 18 patients, and you don't have that number of patients, you ought to be offering to help out, and you should be doing other things. You should be grabbing patients off your colleagues' lists who haven't got patients to see.
Yes.
You should be making yourself useful, and this is the difference between a short-term and a long-term mindset when it comes to locum work.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Exactly. And one thing you've mentioned a few times, Alexis, and I'm assuming that you're talking about the same thing I'm thinking of, is this GP Hub.
Oh, yeah.
So for those who don't know GP Hub, this is the system in Wales where you've got a lot of locum or sessional GPs who are based in the population centres like Cardiff and maybe Newport and Swansea, and there are some practices in rural places that they can't get locums or cover. So essentially what they've been doing for quite some time, even before COVID came in, was they would have a home phone triage system where they would remotely log into the surgery and phone patients on a triage basis. If they can deal with issues on the phone, they would do that. And if they couldn't, then they'd book them in to see the GP. And the idea is they're still doing locum work, but the GP is seeing less face-to-face, which is essentially what now people have taken on throughout COVID. But that brings us to a topic about sort of the way, well, one way we work, and also the problems that rural areas have, especially in Wales. For example, we've got North Wales and the very far west of Wales. Do you feel that perhaps from a locum point of view, they're a bit underrepresented in terms of the people they can get at the moment? Do you find that on the Welsh locum website as well, that they struggle to find people to fill the vacancies?
I think so. I think it's a bit of a chicken egg thing. I mean, bear in mind that I'm based around Cardiff and I started this for people I knew. And you get this chicken egg situation where GP practices in North Wales use the site less because there's less North Walian locums on it, and North Walian locums don't tend to join it because there's less North Walian practices on it, and it goes round and round. So I do try and encourage people to try and pass the word around. But also, if you are a locum who is, or starting out as a locum in North Wales or West Wales, I would suggest you mail shot all the local practices and let them know you're available, and pass on some information so they can contact you directly. And in the kind of COVID situation, you'd want to make it clear what you would and would not be willing to do. So, for example, if you've got health problems so you couldn't see patients face to face, it's important they're aware of this when they're trying to choose you. But a mail shot tends to be a good way of starting a locum practice.
I think when I started, that was how I was told to do it as well, to go and drop your CV off, do a lot of phone calls, practice managers, let them know you're available. But then I was then introduced to a lot of these website services, Facebook groups in the case of yourself, Alexis, and that's sort of grown. One of the other things that have sort of popped up, and this may be a controversial / sore topic for us, is this new Welsh government-led locum service,
Mildly so, yes,
called the Locum Hub. So, for those of you who are not listening from Wales, just to fill you in, we have all got state-backed indemnity now, and as a result of that, we had to sign up to a register, an All Wales Locum Register. If you didn't want to opt in, you didn't have to, but then you wouldn't get the state-backed indemnity, i.e. you have to pay your own MDU fees. So yeah, we've all been logged on, and we suspected that this may be the outcome, but essentially the Welsh government have developed their own locum work-finding website called the Locum Hub.
No, but that's the whole point. It's not theirs. I mean, this is really getting me, right? It's not. They haven't developed it. It's a private.
No. Yeah, go on. I'll let you finish.
It's a private company.
Yes.
It's a private company who's taken money from the government and is doing their business, whatever they're doing, and the government is pushing that one particular company. So why is that?
I don't know. There was that freedom of information request that someone passed around that this company has had, was it £500,000 worth of public money? Which is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, the amount my site makes is nothing. I did it as a community thing. You know, it pays its running costs, and that's pretty much it. They went through a tender process, which I never heard of, so how they publicised that, I don't know. But I imagine they would say that they've done an open tender process. These are the people who've come around and bid for it. So I don't think you can really accuse them of favouritism in that way. I mean, whether or not there's been words in people's ears or not, I couldn't possibly comment. But it's certainly nothing I heard anything about. But they developed this from scratch, and it may be they wanted to have a system that wasn't tied to any company, and so they've set their own system up for that method. But it does seem to be a huge waste of money in that.
I think that's the main gripe. That is the main gripe, because you know, it might all be done with very good intentions, but people are always wary of, or at least I'm always wary of somebody that I'm hooking up to and don't really know who's behind it. So when I was finished my VTS, Paul Williams was my, we did our, BTS together. I knew him. And I signed up to him, but I never actually used anything else. And then I knew Alexis, and, so you know who you're talking to.
Sure.
And you know how you're getting your work, and, it's all fair. But I think I was a bit wary because of that. It wasn't really visible.
Mm-hmm.
It was all sort of, and, now but it's all...
I think it's reasonable to be wary. I don't like the way that it's being pushed on new locums as well. I've had reports of people saying they've been told, I have to sign up for this to be a locum in Wales, which I think is a bit anti-competitive.
Yes.
I can see the rationale for them wanting to have something they've got total control over. However, the reports I've had back are not particularly favourable about their site in any case. And I do think that the money could have been spent elsewhere, given that the amount that my site costs is probably on the region of 1% per year of what they paid for this for 3 years. So I do think it's a bit of an own goal. And we will see. Ultimately, people will vote with their feet. If practices find that their site, which is free for them to use, is more effective for them than my site, which is £2 per filled shift, a trivial fee, then they'll use that. At the end of the day, people will go with what works. The reports we've had from Locum that when practices put 50 shifts on their site, they're getting 50 emails, and their response to when they complain was to be told, well, mark yourself as not available for work. Doesn't suggest to me that this is a site that Locums are going to be using for the long term, but I could be wrong, and we will have to wait and see.
I think one of the other gripes that Locums have had is, and I'm going to phrase this carefully, this suggested price per shift that is being advertised there as well. And obviously, from our point of view as locums, I can't talk to Dr. Sajjad or Dr. Alexis about what I'm charging practices, because that's known as price fixing. Yet on the other hand here, we've got suggested prices coming on the website.
I think, again, you have to be quite careful there. If you are a builder and you talk to a builder friend and they say, how much would you charge putting on this wall? I'll charge 100 quid. And you say, well, I'll charge 150. They go, all right, I'll put my price at 130 then. That's price fixing. But if you go to, if a customer advertises and says, I want this wall built, I'll pay 120 quid for it, that's absolutely fine. What is not allowed is for a group of customers to come around and say, this is the maximum we will pay for any wall in this area, and this is what you must do to get our business. That would also be price fixing. So if a surgery says the most we'd be willing to pay for this session is 50 quid, to pick a random number, that's absolutely fine. It's if a group of people agree and conspire, to be a bit dramatic about it, to set a maximum price. That's an absolutely forbidden thing. Now, I've not looked at the Locum Hub site, so I don't know exactly what's happening there. Is it groups of practices, or is it individual practices saying what they'd be willing to pay?
I think it's individual practices all coming up with the same figure.
Yeah.
That's a little bit suspicious, because if someone were to report that to the Office of Fair Trading, or wherever they call themselves these days, then they've got the power to go trawling through email logs and see if there's any evidence there's been a conspiracy to agree this. And if there has, the penalties they can impose are really quite swingeing. They can charge you up to 10% of your turnover, not your profit, for up to 3 years. So that could break a practice. So if any practices are involved in that, I would say it is incredibly foolish behaviour.
And again, playing the sort of devil's advocate card here, I'm not saying this is my own view. I could argue that actually, no, this is necessary to try and get all the locums in one place, so everyone knows that here's the bank of locums to use, and also there needs to be some regulation of how much, as a health trust and indirectly practices, we're spending on locums. So this is actually a good idea to try and regulate the cost of locums, and also have one area we can get all pool of locums rather than several places where I can get locum work.
It also matters on what locums feel is a fair price they need to charge for the time when they get ill, or they're not getting paid for their leave or Christmas holidays. I mean, I had my gallbladder surgery. I was in hospital for X amount of time, I wasn't getting paid for that. So whatever that time or month I spent, I dipped into my savings, and that's where the sick pay comes in. So I think that's the issue, and I think it's all about talking. It's not us versus them, is it? I mean, Alexis said this once. It's not us versus them. It's about us working together. But you got to work with the practice and talk about what is fair. I mean, and you will develop that relationship with the practice, won't you?
It is an ecosystem. Not everybody wants to be a partner. Your last podcast was about mental health and so forth. A lot of people working as a locum, so you can control your workload. Yeah. And if you get overloaded and overstressed, you can reduce and just work mornings for a bit, which is not the kind of flexibility you have in other areas. At the same time, you do have to set reasonable rates, and you do have to work with people. And a lot of people coming into locums trying to make, because they see it as a route to make quick money, I think is a big part of the problem. I've heard stories of practices treating locums very badly, and I've heard stories of locums treating practices very, very badly. It's on both sides. So as you say, we've got to talk, and we've got to try and be reasonable so we can carry on working together. Otherwise, all that's going to happen is that, as with this current situation, locums drift off to private medicine, and then when there is an increased demand, there's not there.
So I think that brings us quite neatly on the future of sessional work or locum work. What both of you? What's your opinion? Do you think? Although we've seen a downturn in the amount of work available to locums during the COVID pandemic lockdown. It's starting to pick up again. For those who do have more ad hoc sessions or less long-term work. What do you think the future is of locum or sessional GP work in Wales and in the UK as a whole?
I'm letting Sajid answer that one first. You can deal with that one.
I think I'm going to go back to what my dad, God rest his soul, used to say. I mean, he was a doctor in the NHS some 35, 40 years ago. And he used to say things never change. And I can sort of see that. There's sort of service changes, and there's surface redecoration of things, but under the skin is still the same things which are carrying on. I think there is a need for doctors. Population is growing. People are getting more older. There's always going to be more need for doctors to work. So I don't think there's going to be much of a change. I think it's just going to be carrying on. But in terms of COVID, I mean, this is a blip in the time, and this will go. And when it goes, so with our memory, human beings are very short-term. They've got a very short-term memory. Everybody's forgotten the Spanish flu until COVID happened. So I think we'll forget the COVID as well, and we'll go back to our old.
To be fair, the Spanish flu was 1918, wasn't it? I think most people's memories don't go back quite that far.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be the same, but I'll probably leave it to Alexis to explain a bit more.
Well, leave me the easy one, I see. Okay. Well, I think that we are going to see an upturn in locum work, mainly because of burnout. We're getting salaried and partner doctors aren't taking holidays. They're working hard and harder to help deal with COVID, and there's a limit to how much they can work. So I do think there is going to be an upsurge in work again. In the long term, I don't see things changing. There's always going to be a market for good locums. I think that there's always going to be demand for people who are able to fit in well in a team and do work on the short term or long term to meet changes in practice staff health. So we'll have to see how COVID works. I think it's Sajad's comment that it's a blip. I think is a little optimistic, but we will see as the numbers are going up again.
Yeah, I think I'd probably echo your thoughts, but the skeptic in me is also going to come out here. I feel at present, with the powers that be, they're looking to clamp down on locum work, and I think there's going to be increased pressure for people to take up partner and salary work. They're going to try and push that agenda. That's my opinion. just from discussions I've had with various people who work in the health board and what they're trying to do in hospitals, first of all, but that will extend here. Now, obviously, the difficulty they're going to have if they try and do that is GPs are independent contractors and they're responsible for their own finances.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, we are also seeing a larger number of managed practices because people are handing their contracts back. And I think perhaps that's where things may become more influenced by the powers that be rather than us being as autonomous as the GP practice field once was. That's the skeptic in me. And that's how I feel perhaps things will start to change. Obviously, it'll be a case of people saying, no, I'd like the way I'm working now, the flexibility, partner life is not for me. But it's where, well, I think it's who holds their ground the most who will eventually come on top, if that makes sense. But again, this is just...
They're going to make salaried or partnership work more attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People won't go to it if it's not an attractive prospect.
Exactly. I mean,
push, they'll just leave medicine.
Yeah, you can't really expect to make changes without making changes to the way things are, if that makes sense. So I don't mind becoming a partner. I don't mind becoming a salary, but I need to be able to do what I need to do now to a certain degree. You know, obviously I'm going to let as well, but you know, I don't want to be overworking and getting stressed and going into depression and then going off sick and whatever. Don't want to be doing that. So if you want me to be actually functional and be a good doctor to the patients, I need to be able to do the things I need to do. And if they can provide that, yeah, by all means, I'll become a partner.
Well, the other thing as well is you've got unintended consequences. If you turn around and say, right, we want a state-funded salaried service, great, well, you'll get just what you get with QOF, where they found that actually these GPs do an awful lot of work that isn't recorded well. And if you then are paying people on a salary basis, you'll find they'll behave like that. They'll clock in and clock out. Whereas we all know how much work we actually do behind the scenes, which is nominally unpaid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's a nice little way to to end the session. I think in the pipeline we're going to have the other point of view with a podcast with a partner. So tune in for that.
What partners don't want you to know?
I look forward to hearing how greedy and how lazy all locums are.
Yeah. So we may get a bit of a bashing, but we'll see. But I think this has been a very good insight into the life of a locum for those who are not locums or those who are looking to get into locum work. Obviously, we can spend hours talking about this and the issues and the benefits and the pitfalls, but as always, we always have a time limit on these discussions. Mm-hmm. So, but we'll see. We'll see if people want another session. We can always get together again and talk more about it. But I think for this week, we'll leave things there. Thank you both, Dr. Sajjad and Dr. Alexis, sorry. And yeah, for everyone else who's listening, we'll see you again next week.
Thank you very much.